Hello there and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley. My name is Draxter Dupre and I'm alone here today. Joe is already on vacation somewhere, hiding from the sun. And we are officially done for our first season of live-to-tape shows. However, as we indicated last week, every Friday throughout the summer, we have pre-produced interviews with important folks for you from Second Life and the wider Metaverse VR community. So you can tune in over the summer. Now, some of these shows may be shorter, some may be a bit longer than an hour, depending on the flow of the conversation. August 5th, we will be back with the regular 1 hour format. Until then, we won't have any news segments or talk about current events. That should not prevent you, though, from sharing your comments on what's happening on the blog, be it the new Apple OS now bringing WebGL to mobile devices. By the way, Tony Parisi, the king of WebGL, is going to be on the show in a couple of weeks. Now, today, the show, a fascinating interview, finally, with Tom Bölsdorf, an anthropologist and ethnographer at UC Irvine here in California, and author of Ethnography in Virtual Worlds, and another book, Coming of Age in Second Life, and so many other more books. He's been in Second Life for a very long time, and he is probably the number one authority on Second Life culture. He studied Second Life culture like nobody else, in my opinion. Also later, Diana Renoir, who is supervising right now hundreds of volunteers and builders who are putting together SL11B. She doesn't get much sleep. The big birthday exhibit, SL11B, kicks off June 21st. It's on 11 Sims. It's going to be amazing, just like every year, really showcasing the diversity of what we have here in Second Life. First, a couple of housekeeping notes before I forget. Please subscribe to the show on Stitcher. You can subscribe on iTunes, but Stitcher is just really cool. You can just sort of a la carte put your own radio station together. Be it, my example is always, I have a mix of podcasts and then sort of official German propaganda communist radio shows and Rush Limbaugh sandwiched. No, I'm just kidding. Of course not. You'll find the Stitcher banner on the right. You can always call us on Skype, Drax Files, email radio@draxfiles.com, or send an in-world message if you want to get in touch. You can support this show either by becoming a sponsor with your own banner. We just added a couple new ones. Upper Animations, your source for animations and fun gadgets. They're having their 10th anniversary in Second Life right now with loads of free stuff. Check that out. Another new sponsor, Blue Moon Enterprises. Great gear and clothing. All the proceeds from their in-world store and marketplace go to Team Fox, the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. So click on that banner and go shopping in-world for a great cause. An old sponsor, SL Go by OnLive. I just want to mention that the cloud streaming service that brings SL to tablets and old computers. They're now offering a free 7-day trial. Also, I would like to thank everyone congratulating me for the sponsorship agreement I have with Linden Lab. Rest assured, as indicated in the official blog post, I retain full editorial control over upcoming episodes. So this is, in fact, as I like to call it, a win-win-win. Linden Lab gets to show Second Life in all its diverse glory. I get to continue to do the best I can, finding and telling the relevant stories, the stories that I deem relevant. And for all of us residents, we can push back against the negative media narrative and the eye-rolling friends, colleagues, and family whenever we talk about SL publicly. As Joe likes to put it, it's time to come out of the virtual closet. Let's be loud and proud about what we do here in Second Life. Oh, I forgot. As an individual sponsor, you can ping us and get a really, really cool vintage microphone and an on-air sign designed by Chris Lehman from Botanical. This is akin to a tip jar. You put this out in your house in Second Life, and it will remind you to donate $100 Linden per month to support this show as an individual listener, a voluntary subscription, so to speak. The on-air sign will go on. If you pay, it will stay off if you don't pay. You can pay more. You don't have to pay at all. You can throw it in the trash if you're fed up with this show. But please consider helping us out and sponsoring and showing your appreciation for a community podcast. Lastly, before the feature interview, a new Drax Files World Makers video episode number 20 is just fresh off the Final Cut session this morning. It's about designer and illustrator Flockers from Sicily. A wonderful story, inspiring and hopefully empowering. Check that out. All right, so now on to my interview with Tom Bölsdorf, anthropologist and ethnographer at UC Irvine, author of many, many books, great spokesperson, and real expert on Second Life culture. In Second Life, he goes by the name of Tom Bukowski. Without any further ado, here is Tom.
I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I study how people interact, and that means going wherever the people go. For almost 10 years now, one place where I've been going is into Second Life. I also do research in Indonesia. I've done research in many different places, and what's obviously really interesting is that people nowadays are interacting socially online in a whole bunch of different ways, and one way is virtual worlds.
You've been in there for 10 years. That's amazing. You were an original pioneer.
Yeah, I started in 2004. So when I started it, Second Life had about 2,000 accounts and maximum concurrency of 100 to 150. So it was quite small. And what's interesting is that anthropology has been around for more than 100 years. And anthropologists do not only study China and India and the United States. Many anthropologists spend their entire lives studying an island or a village that may only have 500 people or 1,000 people. You can actually learn a lot from studying small communities, and that's a real gift that anthropology has to offer. Many of us specialize in studying small communities. Of course, there are anthropologists that study China or India or Indonesia, which I study as the fourth biggest country by population. But when I started studying Second Life, I would have been happy if it had stayed small. And it got somewhat bigger, but it never became as big as, World of Warcraft or some of these other things. And even now, I often have people saying to me, well, isn't Second Life dead, or isn't it not doing anything? And to me, it's so strange because it has about, 1 million active accounts. That's a lot bigger than a lot of places that anthropologists study. And if you want to learn about human life and how people interact, you don't only study the big things. You really get an incorrect picture of human life if you only study big things. And so when I started studying Second Life, and there were about 2,000 accounts, I had no idea that it was going to get much bigger, and I didn't really need it to. And it's been interesting that it has. I've met a broader range of people probably than I would have had it stayed smaller, but I've learned a lot from it regardless of its size.
And it's also fragmented maybe quite a bit. Maybe it was already at the beginning, the seed. I mean, all the subcultures. How did you go about that aspect of it? Because there's subcultures that don't necessarily overlap. Let's just say the furries and the non-profits. Sometimes you see a furry in a non-profit lecture, but not often.
Absolutely. Well, and if there's one thing that I have learned from spending all of these years studying Second Life, it is how many things that people think are an issue around Second Life are actually not special to Second Life or to virtual worlds at all. It's just an aspect of human culture. So all cultures have subcultures in them and are diverse. And if I study Indonesia, most of my research in Indonesia is about gay Indonesians, and I go to clubs where they go or whatever. Compared to fundamentalist Muslims in a mosque or something, that's very different, right? I mean, many of the people that I know who are gay are Muslim, but they are typically not fundamentalists in that sense. There's many, many different cultures there. And as an anthropologist, whenever you study a culture, you're not claiming or trying to get a universal picture in the sense that like you do a giant survey. You're dipping into a culture and getting to know some of its subcultures. And then from that, you can sometimes get some more general insights, but not about everything. That's just not the way that anthropology works. And so even in the early days of Second Life, and when I started, there was only one island in Second Life, right? Avalon. It was all mainland back then. And it was small enough that it took me a week, but I was able to fly over every single part of every single sim. Even back then, it took me almost 7 days to do. But back then, there was only one island. But even then, in the early days, of course, there were already many different subcultures. But the interesting thing is that when you have subcultures, they actually share something. That's why they're part of a broader culture. So in America nowadays, you can have neo-Nazi skinheads, you can have hippies, you can have all these kinds of people. But the fact that they can even get in fights and disagree means that they share something. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be able to disagree, if you see what I'm saying. And so whenever you study a culture, you always end up focusing on some subcultures, and you learn more about those subcultures in a sense. But they do teach you something about the broader patterns of whatever culture it is that you're looking at. Because even very small communities are never unanimous. There's always diversity in any culture. That's something we always encounter when we do research. But then there are also things that are shared. And that's part of the fun of the research, is trying to figure out which things are shared, which things are not, is part of what makes the research really interesting.
It's interesting because I shot a machinima a few months back, and I was flying over the mainland. I wanted to get shots of the mainland. And then by sheer accident, I was flying into your property there, and I saw your name there. I had this feeling of, wow, it is a global village in a sense. It's so huge, and we got all these private islands and this huge ocean, and there I am on the mainland trying to get a couple of shots, and there is your house. The sprawl of Second Life how did that affect you looking at it? I mean, on the mainland, you were forced to sort of deal with your neighbor. And now we have this suburbanization. I mean, for a long time, we already had it, for years. How did you experience that? From the mainland, where you're close to your neighbor, the neighbor may be a completely different person, have completely different views on things.
In my book, Coming of Age in Second Life, the fourth chapter is called Place and Time. And I ended up putting that chapter fairly early in the book, earlier than the chapters on identity or community or even economics. Because as I was doing the research, I came to realize that place is extremely important to virtual worlds. And it's also very important to understanding what is one of the most important issues for continuing research, including my own, which is what things about virtual worlds are unique or special to them, and which aspects of virtual worlds are shared with broader ranges of internet phenomena, like email or a blog, a website, Facebook, things like that. All of these things share some things. I can friend someone in Facebook. I can friend someone in Second Life. But they also have different aspects to them. And it's very important that we try and study these things and figure out what those things are. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of virtual worlds is that they are places. And that makes them different from media. So I don't refer to Second Life as digital media. Second Life has media in it. There's many newspapers and magazines and machinima and so on. But Second Life itself is not a media any more than Indonesia, where I go, is a media. It's not a media, it's a country. Now, from this, we see a very interesting difference between virtual worlds and, let's say, websites. So if you have a website that is www.drax.com, and I get a website, www.drax1.com. In a sense, our websites are right next to each other. But I don't care what you do on yours. I can't see it. It doesn't influence me. It's a completely separate thing, even though, in a sense, we're neighbors on the internet. But in a virtual world, if you have shared contiguous space, like you do on the mainland of Second Life, you gain something and lose something, right? You gain this sense of a shared place, but that means, for instance, that vision becomes very important, because you can put something ugly next to my build. Or something else that I wrote about in my book is that because of the way that the server structure of Second Life is created, even if you have a beautiful house next to mine, if you have a bunch of dance parties of 40 avatars in them, there's going to be a lot of lag in my house next to your dance club. And thus you have had things like zoning in Second Life, part of which has been around adult content or things like that, but part of it has been to deal with things like lag. So in some ways, the move to individual islands makes things more like a regular website does, like Drax.com and Drax1.com, where you could be right next to each other on islands, so to speak, but you don't have to worry about what the person next to you is doing, and you also aren't affected by their server directly. It's a little different if you have islands that touch each other, then they can share some server stuff. But anyway, you get the basic point. And this is what's interesting, is even in Second Life, then you get these very interesting debates. Is this making it like a gated community, or is it making it more like a safe haven from griefers, right? And you get these very interesting debates that happen. And to me, as a researcher, what's most interesting is what even makes these debates possible, which is the way that virtual worlds are places. And that really is one of the most unique aspects of virtual worlds. That's why you can have avatar bodies and all that other kind of thing. And like I said, the reason why that's interesting and important to me is I disagree both with people who say everything online is the same. A cell phone is the same as Facebook. A Facebook is the same as eBay. eBay is the same as World of Warcraft, is the same as Second Life. It's all the same. I think that's wrong. The idea that they're completely different is also wrong, but they do share some things. And so it's this interesting gray zone in the middle that as researchers we're trying to figure out what aspects of these online technologies are shared and which aspects of them are different. And that includes nowadays the way that they can interact, so that you can use Facebook in Second Life, or you can go onto eBay and use Twitter or Facebook to comment on something that you like, right? So these different technologies now interpenetrate in many cases in very interesting ways. So it's really a fascinating time to be trying to understand all the stuff that's happening.
I remember a talk that Ralph Koster once gave where he stipulated that everything is a virtual world, and I found myself disagreeing with that because well, he was saying if we're both on a website where there's a chat interface, we're interacting and we are in a world. And I realized that I'm maybe not of that persuasion. I do feel that I need to be in the same space in a more traditional sense. If I'm in your house in Second Life and we both sit on the couch, then we are in fact in a world.
Yeah, I mean, if you can use it in a kind of metaphorical sense, but I do think definitions are helpful and definitions don't have to mean everything. And actually, in my Second Life book, one of the best ways I tried to come up with a definition for what counts as a virtual world is what I call the AFK test. So, as you know, because you know Second Life very well, you can be in Second Life and you go away from keyboard. Now, the funny thing is you might still be at your keyboard, but your avatar is dancing, or it's in a club, or it's at someone's house, and you've gone to get a drink of water, or just like what happened right now, I had to go down to get the mail, right? That kind of thing. And so one thing that I say in my book is that if you can go AFK, then it's a virtual world. So from email, you can't really go AFK from email, right? Or if I'm shopping for a book on Amazon.com and then I go to have breakfast, people wouldn't really say I'm AFK from that. But actually, Bruce Sterling, the science fiction writer and also internet theorist, I think is actually correct when he says, in his opinion, he's written at one point that the first virtual world in a certain sense, even though it's very low tech, is actually the telephone. Because in the telephone, you do have that shared sense. And something I wrote about is, in some ways, the first case of AFK, even though the acronym doesn't quite make sense because there weren't keyboards then, but the first case of AFK was sometime in 1890 or 1895, 100 years ago, whenever it was, when for the first time in the very early history of the telephone, for the first time, two people were talking and the doorbell rang or the tea kettle boiled and one person put down the phone, but they didn't hang up. They put down the phone and they went to answer it. So even just now, when the mailman came and you were listening to my music, in a sense, I was AFK in a very primitive sense. But that's why, and this is something that some people think is strange, but I actually think this is true. A telephone call, even though it's very low tech, or even like Skyping like we are right now, is more of a virtual world than a first-person shooter game like BioShock or something like that looks beautiful and is very detailed, but it's only on your laptop and no one else can see it. And when you shut down your computer, it's gone. I actually think, even though that looks more like Second Life, if it's not networked, if it's just on your laptop, I actually think the conversation that we're having right now is more of a virtual world than that beautiful BioShock thing, which looks like a virtual world, but is not. Now, of course, many of those kinds of things nowadays have a multiplayer mode where you go online, then it starts working more like a virtual world. So it's really fun to think about what these different things do and don't do.
Fascinating that you bring this up, because my son, he's 10 and he plays Minecraft and he looks over my shoulder. He helps me with Second Life stuff sometimes. And he has a Minecraft mobile version, and I asked him, can you have a desktop version where I can be on the desktop and visit your world? And he says, no, that's not a feature for the small mobile app. So in that sense, that's really not a virtual world either. Although he creates some of the world in the mobile version of Minecraft, and he can invite me temporarily, but when he shuts it down, it's basically gone, and I cannot visit it at my own choosing.
That's right. That's right. And so I think, once again, these, to me, there is, and this is something I talk about in my Second Life book, you can use a term like virtual in many different ways, and that's okay. And one thing I talk about in my Second Life book is that one thing that Second Life teaches us is that in certain ways we have been virtual all along, that to be virtual is part of what it means to be human. And it goes back to cave paintings and the earliest part of history. In a certain sense, we've always had a kind of virtual aspects to our lives. But there's also a much more limited definition that I use for a virtual world, where, for instance, I've had people say, well, isn't like a beautiful novel like a virtual world? Like you read War and Peace, you read The Hobbit, and you feel like you're in that world, and isn't that a virtual world? And I say, no, I can't go change my clothes when I'm reading The Hobbit inside of it. I can't change the plot. I can't meet Drax and talk to him inside of The Hobbit. Now, Lord of the Rings influenced the design of virtual worlds, and in a sense, there's a kind of virtualness to reading a novel, but that's different than the more limited meaning of virtual worlds that I would use. And I actually think all of this talk about definitions is not just meaningless philosophy. I actually think it's very important, as we are seeing all of these new technologies appear, that we try and get a language, a set of concepts to study them and talk about them. I actually think it's very important because it is amazing, and you know this, of course, how much confusion there is out there about all of these technologies. There's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion. And so I actually, in my writing on these things, I spend a lot of time doing definitions, but I actually think that is a really important part of it. It's just as important as the, interesting, sexy stories about the cool things that people are doing, because if we don't have a basic understanding about what we're looking at, it really makes it hard to figure out why it's important.
The term virtual itself, obviously, and you have undoubtedly encountered this as well, is such a loaded term that when people who are critical, skeptical, just really don't know what they should make of something like Second Life in particular, push back and say virtual is not real. Now I understand, it's something that you guys make up where you sort of escape into. I mean, that just really never ceases to amaze me that is sort of the knee-jerk reaction of my friends even who would call themselves open-minded. Why is that? Why do we need to make this distinction?
It's a very important point. And one thing that I do in all of my books and articles about this stuff is the set of terms I use is virtual versus actual, or virtual versus physical, or online versus offline. But I never say virtual versus real. It's all real. And part of it has to do with sort of folk theories we have about what counts as real, that it means it's something that you can touch or something like that. But I tell people, if I take an online course to study German or Spanish, and then I can speak Spanish, I can go to Mexico and talk to people. I could go to Spain and talk to people. That's real knowledge that I have. If I go online and I buy a song on iTunes, that music is vibrating the air. It's real music, and it is real money that I've spent to purchase that music. That actually real things are not only the things that we touch. And we've known that for a long time. We're using language to talk right now, and language is very, very real, but I can't reach out and touch it in a sense. No word is ever perfect, but I would certainly never use real to refer to only one side of what's going on, because what's so interesting is obviously the way that both sides are real. And I think part of that has to do for a long history that even goes to like dominant ideas in Christianity about the spirit versus the flesh. That can can be shaping parts of it. I do actually think that the Second Life name that Linden Lab came up for the virtual world is unfortunate, because I think it misleads people to say, oh, you should get a first life or a real life because you say Second Life. But something I've written about as well is, even in Second Life, people will say when they're typing or talking, IRL or RL, and they'll say something like, real life is calling, or, RL, I have to go do something. But then if I'm interviewing them and doing my research, they might type that quickly. But then if I ask them, I noticed you said RL. Do you think that only, that this isn't real? And they'll say, oh, no, I don't mean it that way. It's just something I typed.
Yeah, this is something I understand to be internally for the sort of initiated, us that are part of this culture. We understand what is meant by it was real. We have to go to the bathroom or something and we come back. But does it have to do with us having to come out of the virtual closet? That's a term that Yardley, who was co-hosting the podcast with me, coined, and she wants to encourage people to come out of the virtual closet by embracing Second Life. Now, it's interesting that there are many opinions about if the word Second Life is unfortunate. Yo has also said what she usually does when people say, Second Life, I understand, for people who have no first life. She responds by saying, no. Second Life, because I have so many interests, they don't just fit in one life. I need a second one. So she flips it around just in terms of her own pushback.
Well, another issue to think about here, and the Second Life name is not a big deal. I think it's fine. But another thing here that also really confuses people is making a difference between fundamental aspects about virtual worlds in general versus the particular way that Second Life has been set up. So because of, Philip Rosedale, the original creator of Second Life, his sort of background, and he liked going to Burning Man and all this stuff, he created Second Life at the beginning so that you could not have your physical world identity. I could not be Tom Belstorff. I had to pick a name like Tom Bukowski. Very different from things that happened later, like Facebook, right? But a virtual world does not require anonymity. It doesn't require role playing. Many of them have that, but as IBM, Microsoft, many companies have business meetings in Second Life. For them, it is very obvious, right, that is real life. They're having a business meeting, or teachers are using it for teaching a class. And nowadays there's various ways in Second Life, as that you can make your physical world name visible to people. If from the beginning, just pretend for a moment that going back 10 years, if from the beginning Second Life had been like Facebook, where it was really trying to get you to use your physical world name. I'm not saying I like that, don't get me wrong, but just as a thought experiment, people would have much less of a sense that it's not real. If I was Tom Belstorff, and that you wouldn't have this language of coming out of a virtual closet. You don't really talk about that with Facebook, right? And so part of it is that Second Life was built around anonymity, which nowadays, in the era of Edward Snowden and the NSA and all that, is sort of nice, right? That you can have things that are not, that can be anonymous in a certain way. The fact that it was built around anonymity at the beginning has contaminated the way that people think about virtual worlds, because virtual worlds do not have to be anonymous. They can be. It just depends, right? Just like for email, you could have an email account that you have a Gmail account that's linked to your physical name, and you could have a random one that you just use for other things and that no one can link to who you are. And so I do think that has contributed to some people thinking, oh, it's virtual, it's not real, is a particular choice that was made by Linden Lab early in the history of Second Life.
And many people want last names back.
That's right.
You can't please them all. I just wanted to say, for clarification, the what Yo was referring to coming out of the virtual closet was more of sort of combating the stereotypes, where people, and I have noticed this myself, that when I talk to others, I have not used the term Second Life periodically, because I felt it is so loaded with some of those unfortunate sort of quote-unquote scandals.
Right. And another source of confusion I was going to say is that Second Life is not a game, but there's a lot of video games out there, and there's a lot of games inside of Second Life, and people sometimes think of Second Life as a game. Richard Bartle, who is one of the first designers of virtual worlds, has a wonderful quotation I use in my book where he says that the Pasadena Rose Bowl is not a game. It's a place where you can play games if you'd like, but it's not a game. And virtual worlds are not games. They're places where you could play games if you like. And part of the negative opinions about things like Second Life have to do from an assumption that it's not real, but also there's still to this day a lot of negative views about games and gaming, because we live in a capitalist society where you're supposed to be working all the time, and leisure is suspect, and having fun is suspect. You're lazy, you're not doing the right thing. And so all of those views about games also contaminate views about things like Second Life. But you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't know about Second Life because there's so many virtual worlds and online games out there. But, I do research on the island of Sulawesi. I do research in the city of Makassar, which has over 1 million people in it. But, most people in America don't know where it is. Or I do a lot of research in Surabaya, which is the second largest city in Indonesia. It has 3 or 4 million people. Most people in America could not find Surabaya on a map. So it doesn't really bother me that people don't necessarily know about what Second Life is, because as an anthropologist, my job is to tell them, just like my job is to tell them about Java or Surabaya or whatever it is that I study. The world's a big place, and it's changing quickly, and especially in the technology area, there are so many virtual worlds, online games, websites, social networks like Facebook and Snapchat and all this other kind of stuff that people just can't keep up. And usually what happens is people will hear about something when it first appears and it gets a lot of news, and then after 3 or 4 years, they'll think it's dead, right? MySpace or whatever. And so there's a problem with people's attention span, and that is also a real problem, is that people assume that things just last 1 or 2 years and then go away, but many aspects of the internet don't. They keep going year after year, and we need to take that seriously. And what's more interesting to me is, how can I explain it in a way that is faithful to the greatest degree possible to the experiences of the people who are participating and exploring and using these virtual worlds, to try to give people a sense for why they are doing it and why it makes sense to them and is meaningful and interesting. And if I can do that, then I've succeeded.
It's really unfortunate that the commercial media has conditioned us to believe that there's this limited shelf life, but it plays into the narrative of capitalism. Stuff needs to expire, be thrown away. It's unfortunate.
Absolutely.
You brought this back to Indonesia because I wanted to bring it back too. Now, when you talk to in Indonesia, when you talk to people and do research, how does it fare with in terms of people opening up to you? I imagine this is also my own experience that in Second Life, obviously, and I very much respect that people are very private. It's hard sometimes to get people to open up about their experience. So how does this compare with your work in Indonesia versus Second Life? Is it easier to speak to people in Indonesia than it is in Second Life?
No, I mean, in both cases, there's similar issues. And just last year, I published a book with 3 friends of mine called A Handbook of Ethnographic Methods for Virtual Worlds to talk about this. And for an anthropologist, we have a lot of methods that we use, and those can include doing an interview or doing a survey. But the number one method that we use is participant observation, which means that you don't just walk up with a survey or some questions on a piece of paper. You participate in the community to the greatest degree that you can. And in Indonesia, where I was studying gay Indonesians, so I have become fluent in the Indonesian language. And I would go there for months and hang out with gay men and lesbian women in the parks, in the discos, in their homes, and spend hours and hours, months with people before I would begin doing interviews, so that people knew who I was. They knew why I was there, and I didn't try to go native. I didn't try to become Indonesian, obviously, but I learned their language, I learned their customs, I learned about Hinduism and Islam and the religions that are there, and that people respected that I was taking all that time and effort. And that doesn't mean that everyone would necessarily want to talk to me, but most people really did. And also I helped out some nonprofit organizations organizations doing AIDS work. And so you really try to become part of the community. And in Second Life, I did the same thing. For my Second Life book, I did over a year of research. And for the first several months, I got a house in Second Life. You flew by the newest version of my house in Second Life. I learned how to build things. I built that house myself. I've learned how to, build. I know how to do basic scripting, but I know how to, move prims around and build a house and go shopping. And I've done all that stuff, and I would get to know all that very well and then participate in things in Second Life in the exact same way. And the reason I wrote this methods book recently with my friends is there's a real danger, because to go into Second Life is a lot easier than to go to Indonesia. I don't need to get on a plane for hours and hours and get my passport renewed and spend a lot of money to go halfway across the world. It's really easy to go online for anyone. But to get to know a community, it still takes time. It's like learning a language. There are no shortcuts. You cannot learn French in 2 days. I'm sorry, there's no way. And a real problem that's happening right now with online research that uses ethnographic methods like I'm talking about is there are people who will go into Second Life for a weekend and then claim they are doing ethnographic research, but they are not, right? And I have this very funny story from when I was in Europe a couple of years ago, meeting with some graduate students. And they told me that they were doing online research, but they disagreed with my recent book. And they said, we don't believe that you can do ethnographic research, Tom, in a virtual world like Second Life. The avatar faces are not detailed enough. You just can't get to know people. They're always trying to hide things. You can never really know them. And I said, well, wait a moment. Please tell me a little more about your methods. What did you do? And they said, well, we just teleported into a shopping mall in Second Life, and we walked up to people and asked them to tell us questions about their feelings and their thoughts, and no one would tell us anything. And I told them, well, if in the physical world you went into a shopping mall and just walked up to someone in a shopping mall and said, hello, could I ask you some questions? People aren't going to want to talk to you. They don't know who you are. They don't know why you're there. What do you expect? And I told them it has nothing to do with it being online or offline. It's that to do ethnographic research, you have to take time to get to know people. And so even right now with the disability research I'm doing with Fran and Barbie and them, I've been working with them now for almost a year and a half. And every week I go to the meetings, right? I participate in events. Even now that I'm busy or I have a job, I'm a professor, I still do that. I would never dream of writing about the disability experience in Second Life or whatever, unless I had spent at least 6 months getting to know people. And there's a real issue nowadays in the era of, journalism about these technologies where people want immediate answers, but to really get the real interesting stuff, it takes time, because even for people to lie, they have to know enough of the truth to be able to lie in a convincing way. And I can never prove everything that people tell me in Second Life, but also you're not just interviewing one person. You're looking for patterns in what people are doing. And to me, the real take-home lesson about it is that it takes time, and often people want an easy answer. And for the methods I'm talking about, you can't do that.
In journalism, I think you called it parachute journalism.
That's right. And so, parachute ethnography. And sometimes you need to know about something, and you're a journalist, you need to do something for 1 or 2 days to get the news, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's different kinds of research, but the kind that I'm talking about can give us certain kinds of interesting information, but the price that you pay is it does take time. Although to me, that's a joy. It's not a price. It's fun. It does take a time investment.
I think also some of those cliche notions that the mainstream has about Second Life in particular is due to exactly that parachuting in. It's interesting that your students would sort of look at say that the faces don't reflect enough emotion to be able to respond to their questions.
I've had people tell me, I tried to go into Second Life to do research, and I teleported in, and there was just a couple people hanging out. There was nothing going on. I couldn't find anything to do, so I left after an hour. I just don't think it's possible. How can you do this research, Tom? And I've told them, fly with me to Indonesia someday and just show up in Jakarta or Surabaya And you'll just see some people wandering around and you won't know what to do because you don't know where to go yet. You expect that you're going to go online and have people walk up to you with all the perfect answers. But you go, if you go to Boston or you go to San Diego or you go anywhere and you just show up, you'll see some people on the side of the street or in the 7-Eleven store, and it'll look boring because you don't know what to look for yet.
See, I was in a good mood before I talked to you. Now I think we're going to hell in a handbasket if students don't understand anymore what it takes. The shoe letter anthropology here.
Well, I do think that they do know, and to be fair, a couple things. Number one, people need to learn, and we need to explain this to them. Another factor with this is that to do the kind of research I'm talking about, it takes money and time. And I've had very difficult conversations sometimes with graduate students or researchers that are in a situation where they only have money for 1 or 2 months of research. And they're very upset because they know that they can't really do it very well, but their university doesn't have much money, or, those kinds of issues can show up as well, to be fair to them. But also, part of what we need to do as researchers, speaking for myself as an anthropologist, is not just explain Second Life, but explain what it means to do this kind of research. And that's why I did this second book about Second Life with 3 friends of mine. And actually, Bonnie Nardi did research in World of Warcraft, T.L. Taylor did research in EverQuest, and Cilly Pierce did research in There.com and also Second Life. And so the 4 of us were able to talk about sort of different kinds of virtual worlds and how you do this kind of research. And I went to the trouble of doing that book with my friends because I do think it's important that we tell people how to do this kind of thing properly.
2 more questions. I'm not sure if that term is correct. Community of intent. In Second Life, people congregate because they want to. In Indonesia, or here where I live on the central coast of California, which is beautiful. I like it here, but I came here by complete accident, and now I'm here. In Second Life, people can go wherever they want to go. How does that factor into your work?
So it depends. Like, in my research in Indonesia, gay men know that there's a certain park or a certain disco where they can meet each other. And so it's a community of intent. But they're in that city rather than another city, maybe because they were born there or because they had a job there. And so there's a lot of gray zone in between intent and not intent, right? So typically in our lives, we have some degree of control, some degree of making communities of intent. Maybe you ended up in the Central Coast, but you joined a soccer club or a chess club because you share that kind of intent. Now, in Second Life, it is true, it's quite extreme that it's almost pure intent. I mean, the only exception would be sort of like if I have my house on the mainland, I can't control necessarily who my neighbors are. But that also even extends to our bodies, that in something like Second Life, you have almost complete control over the way your body looks. And so people will often interpret a lot about you based on your avatar body because they know you chose it all. Whereas if they meet me in the physical world, they know I picked maybe my haircut, I picked the clothes I'm wearing, but my height, I really didn't have any control over. And so these virtual environments do allow for a lot of intent, a lot of choice at the level of the individual, like the individual body and the profile, the avatar body, but also the communities that you join, where you get to do some of that typically in the physical world, but it's even more so in these virtual environments. And so, to me, that just became an interesting issue to think about, is how is it that when choice is at the forefront, that you get to pick, the only limit that you have in some ways in something like Second Life is the limit to the number of groups you can join. And they keep upping that because people want to be part of more and more groups. And of course, you can be part of a community without joining an official group. That issue of intent is something that is very, very interesting. And even the way it's shaped by things like alts, by having the possibility of having more than one avatar body, and you can attach different kinds of intents to different bodies. So someone might have an alt that they use for role playing. They might have another one that they see as closer to their physical world identity, or that they use when they're selling clothes that they design or something like that. So it's a very interesting issue. And it's once again not unique to Second Life, because if you think about Facebook and Facebook groups and Facebook pages, the internet in general is a place where people can make all kinds of connections and build all kinds of communities of intent that they couldn't do otherwise. And people have written about, for instance, especially if it's something quite obscure, people who, Clive Thompson has written about people who like to build their own guitars. Before the internet, there were people around the world who liked to build their own guitars, but there weren't enough of them with enough money to have like a guitar builders magazine or convention or something. They were pretty isolated from each other. But with the internet, it's a much lower threshold to be able to create a kind of community of intent. Without the internet, unless you're really close physically, it takes a lot of money and time and trouble to have those communities of intent. So many of the most important communities of intent in Second Life, if you think about something like New Caledon, are actually around places and the pleasure of building a beautiful island together or a place together that looks medieval or looks science fiction or looks like Star Wars or something like that. And so something that's really interesting about Second Life is that you get communities of intent. I mean, even with like the disability stuff that I've been interested in, Virtual Ability Island. The island is extremely important to the community. It's not just about avatar bodies or about people who meet and have a conversation or do fun things together. It's about a place and helping to build that place and maintain it and do stuff. And so for many people in Second Life, not all of them, but for many communities in Second Life, communities, what we could call communities of intent, the placeness of Second Life and the ability to build and modify land and create buildings and stuff is extremely important to their communities of intent, especially because it makes possible asynchronic social interaction, so that if we're not online at the same time, I could still go to New Caledon, I could modify a house, add some stuff to it, leave you a note card saying, hey, Drax, I tried to add another floor to this building, but I don't really like the way the roof looks. Could you try and fix it up later? And so we can actually have a kind of community of intent and social interaction, even when we're not online at the same time, through the land. And that's really interesting.
That's why I'm so weary with these comparisons between Facebook and Second Life, because the placeness, that core feature of a virtual world, and right now Second Life representing that genre the best it can, is just something that Facebook does not have. And it doesn't have the creative component either. But
yeah, no, absolutely. There's a reason why, like in English, you go in Second Life, but you go on Facebook. They do share some features, but they have some very significant differences. And the fact of land, so you can have this kind of asynchronic social interaction I just mentioned. In Facebook, it's done through a timeline, right? You're sort of you're reading people's messages, but and that, in a sense, that timeline is a shared, co-constructed kind of place, but radically different than a shared island in Second Life. And you're absolutely right. I think we want to both be able to say, here's 3 things that are similar, and here's 5 things that are different.
There was a survey that I did once early on in 2007 when I came in, and it asked questions about the place where I was born in real life, and it asked questions about the place where I live now, and I had to answer those, and then they asked me questions about the place that I live in Second Life and my relationship to it and how important it is. It was fascinating because I tried to answer truthfully. And, when I go home in Munich, I have a certain connection to it, but I'm also not obsessed by it. It's where I was born, but I moved away. And then when those questions about Second Life were in the survey, I realized how big a connection I do have to that community in Second Life, but I guess that's the community of intent.
Yeah, I mean, people can be very attached to. I mean, the thing about any of these technologies is different people can use them very differently. So there's some people that are sort of homeless in Second Life and they just go to events or whatever, and then there's some people that get very attached to 1 or 2 communities that actually have places in Second Life. And so you see a big range that way for sure.
Last question: should Linden Lab? I know you're fully employed, but should Linden Lab hire you, or should Linden Lab hire someone like you from a social science background? Because one could argue that they're administering a world, and maybe it's not a technology problem.
I mean, it is interesting. A lot of these companies do have social scientists on their payroll, and that they do some kind of in-world research. There's community managers for a lot of online games that do these kinds of things as well. And it is, to me, it is an interesting or important thing for these companies to do, because no matter how good the technology is, if people don't use it, it doesn't matter. And what leads people to use things is really, unclear. And obviously, if you look at the history of Linden Lab and Second Life, what you see, and this is the whole history of technology, obviously, is that technologies are designed to do one thing, and then people use them for other reasons, and you have to be able to keep up. There's always kinds of emergent design and emergent use that were never originally predicted by their creators. When the web was created, the World Wide Web, it was never intended it would be used for buying clothes and shoes, right? And, when Second Life was originally created, I know some of the original founders talked about how they thought that groups were going to just be sort of like fan clubs. They didn't realize that people were going to be managing entire businesses and economies. And that's why they had to go in and change the group tools to make them much more complicated so you could give people certain roles and do all that kind of stuff. Originally, you couldn't do that. It was the groups were very simplistic because they just thought they would be like a fan club. And then people started doing very complicated things with groups. And then the company had to realize, if we really want to sort of allow this to happen and be more effective, we need to modify the platform to sort of keep up with what it is that people are doing. And so, the social side of these things is really important, because without people, it's just going to be a bunch of bots running around, and that's not going to work so well for anyone.
So that was Tom Bölsdorf. We're linking to his website on our blog. I'm sure he'll be happy to talk with you guys further about what he does in SL in World. Tom Bukowski is the Second Life name. We're almost at the end of the show. A few words from Diana Renoir now, part of a huge team, literally hundreds of volunteers and content creators putting together the fabulous SL11B birthday bash. If you haven't been to any of those in the past years, frankly, shame on you, because SLB is all community driven, and it really, really compresses the amazing breadth and diversity of Second Life like no other event. Not even high-end shopping events, by the way. So stop spending money at the arcade and get ready for SL11B, because the point here is inclusion. This is really the spirit of Second Life in one fabulous celebration of diversity and creativity. So I'm signing off for now. Here is Diana Renoir. See you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.
On Sunday, June 22nd at noon Second Life time, we will open the event to the public. SL11B is the 11th birthday celebration for Second Life. It is 11 Sims. We have 3 performance stages, 1 auditorium. We also have a gift of Bear Island from Linden Lab. Bear Island started, I believe it was SL7B, where it is a collection of all of the Linden Bears. There are several tour pods available throughout the estate. You can get them at one of the tour stations. You can start the tour there, or if you find an empty pod traveling, you can just jump right on it and sit down. It travels throughout the estate, and as you travel, you will see in local chat a brief description of the exhibits you're passing. You hop out if you like and catch another one. This year, there's some added surprises. I can't tell just yet. SL11B is special because last year we hit the landmark, 10 years. Now we're starting on our next decade. It is a conglomeration of the entire community. This event is for every person who has ever logged in at least once. We try to be as inclusive as we can and still meet the general rating. We include art, we include educational builds, collaborative builds, and of course we provide the usual entertainment. We have, last I heard, well over 100 DJs signed up. It may be more. We also have live music, and we have the auditorium, which is our space for anything that falls, outside of the live or DJ performance, interviews, and forums. SL11B is a showcase of the many faceted talents that are within Second Life. SL11B is a testament that Second Life is not dead at all. This year, we are working on a reduced estate. Last year, we had 22 Sims. This year, we only have 11. The Sims are from an anonymous donor. I don't even know who that donor is. They choose to be anonymous. That's okay. We're grateful for the gift. The response was still just as overwhelming as it was for the 10th birthday. We had close to 500 applications this year and just a little over 500 last year. The imagination is still very vivid and very alive within Second Life. Coordinating the volunteers, you're talking about well over 400 people. And then you add exhibitors on top of it, so there's about 250. Add about another 1,000 for the performers. I deal with volunteers and exhibitors. I don't even want to imagine the nightmare our performance crew goes through. Hats off to them. They do a fabulous job every year. It is beyond anything I can comprehend. Press day is on June 21st, starting at noon Second Lifetime. You do have to have a press tag to gain access to the Sims. We're pretty good at keeping things under a wrap. It's a birthday party. Trust me, you don't want to see it right now because it's a mess. You know, as a testament to the longevity and that magic of Second Life, everything you see in SL11B was created by either a member of the staff or a member of the broader community. There's not one single thing there that would be considered prefab. And that is something this team is very, very proud of. We're very grateful for all the residents that participate, the residents that visit. This is done for them. And it is so great to see the entire community come together for 2 weeks.
Radio Hour with Joe Yardley is a weekly production of Basic Drax Entertainment. The show is supported by Bleep Motion, SL Go By On Live, Stitcher, Bot Girls Identity Circus, Carvel Design, Vika Creations, Humanoid Animations, Escapades, Botanical, Death Row Designs, Nantra, Angel Red Couture, Fallen Gods Incorporated, What's Next, Avacon, and Landscapes Unlimited. Contact the show via Skype, Drax Files, Avatar Drax Files, or email radio@draxfiles.com.